Jack Churchill, the man who went to war with a sword. Sometimes history produces people who sound like legend rather than record. Jack Churchill was one of those figures. He was not created by the war. The war merely found him ready. Born in 1906 into a British family of colonial administrators, Churchill spent his childhood between Hong Kong and England, two worlds that rarely met. One was disciplined and bureaucratic, the other old and steeped in military tradition. In that era, being an officer in Britain was not simply a profession, but almost a form of character. Yet Churchill never completely fit that model. He passed military school without difficulty, but without affection for formality. After service in Burma, he did not remain tied to the army. Instead, he traveled, competed in longbow tournaments, played the bagpipes at public gatherings, climbed mountains, and appeared as an extra in historical films. He was not searching for a career. He was searching for intensity. An acquaintance later wrote that Churchill never quite knew what to do with peace. Not because he loved violence, but because he constantly sought situations in which a man had to rely entirely on his own nerve. There is a story from Scotland years before the war. During a mountain climb, his group was caught in a violent storm. Visibility vanished, and cold began to drive them back. Most wanted to turn around. Churchill sat on a rock, took out his bagpipes, and began to play. Not as humor, but as calm. Within minutes, the panic faded. They continued and reached the summit. It was not heroism. It was temperament, the ability to remain steady where others began to unravel. When the Second World War began in 1939, many felt fear or uncertainty. Churchill re-enlisted without hesitation. For him, it was not an escape from life, but an entry into a situation where decisions had weight. In the spring of 1940, British forces in France were already retreating under German pressure. Night movements, shortened lines, and the constant sense that the enemy was just behind them became routine. One night, while his unit was covering the withdrawal, a German patrol approached through the darkness. There was no time for maneuver and no time for organized fire. Churchill did not take his rifle. He took an arrow. With a longbow he carried as part of his equipment, he drew the string and released. A German sergeant fell. The patrol withdrew in confusion. It remains the only recorded kill with a longbow in modern mechanized warfare. After the evacuation, he joined the newly formed British Commandos, units designed for operations that required initiative rather than simple obedience. Here his character finally found its place. Before each operation, while men waited in silence, Churchill would take out his bagpipes and play a short Scottish war tune. Then he set them down, drew his Scottish broadsword, a claymore, and moved forward first. His men never claimed he was invulnerable. They said it was impossible to remain passive beside him. Courage, when visible, becomes contagious. In Italy in 1943, the Allied advance was slow. The Germans did not flee. They withdrew methodically, leaving behind fortified pockets that delayed entire battalions. One such position stood near the village of Molinella. Churchill's orders were reconnaissance. Instead, under cover of night, he approached with a small commando group. Rather than observing quietly, he stood upright and walked toward the first house. In his hands, he carried a sword. The German soldiers, awakened, did not see a battle line. They saw a man behaving as though the outcome had already been decided. Churchill began giving orders in German, telling them to drop their weapons and come out. Tactically, it made no sense. But night combat is often a matter of perception. They did not know how many men stood behind him. They did not know if they were surrounded. They saw only certainty, and they began to emerge, first a few, then groups. He gathered them and sent them back under guard. Then he moved to the next building, and the scene repeated itself. By morning, with only a small number of commandos, He had captured more than 40 German soldiers and cleared a position that was meant to halt a battalion. Later, he explained it simply. Men surrender when they believe resistance is useless. What they had seen was not a weapon. They had seen a man without hesitation. In 1944, he was sent to the Adriatic island of Brač to assist Yugoslav partisans. This time, events unfolded differently. German forces reacted quickly and heavily. His unit was pressed, and withdrawal became inevitable. Witnesses later recorded that, when the fight was already lost, Churchill stood upright and played the bagpipes as bullets struck around him. Not an attempt to win, but a refusal to abandon his nature, even in defeat. A mortar blast knocked him unconscious. When he awoke, German soldiers surrounded him. He was captured. Because of his surname, the Germans briefly suspected he might be related to Winston Churchill and sent him to an officer's camp. He did not remain still. He escaped and walked for days through mountains, attempting to reach Allied lines. He was captured again. Near the end of the war, American forces liberated him. When told the war was over, his reaction was not relief but disappointment, not because he desired destruction, but because he had finally found clarity of purpose. After 1945, he did not become a man of memories. He served in Palestine, became an instructor, surfed in Australia, and organized expeditions. He did not live in the past. He lived in motion. Jack Churchill did not decide the war. He did not command armies or conquer fronts. But in an age of industrial warfare, where machines and numbers determine outcomes, he reminded those around him of something older, that even on the modern battlefield, there remained a place for individual character. Technology changes warfare. Human nature does not. Churchill was not a man without fear. He was a man who refused to let fear make his decisions. And perhaps that is why he is remembered. Not as the deadliest soldier of his time, but as a man who, when confronted by history's chaos, chose to walk forward as if it were the most natural act in the world. History is usually told through armies, generals, and numbers. Divisions, fronts, strategies. But sometimes, between those vast movements, something different appears. A person who refuses to behave like part of the crowd. Jack Churchill was not the only one. In ancient Greece, at the pass of Thermopylae, Leonidas I knew the battle was lost before it began. He did not stay because he could win, but because he could not leave. Sometimes courage is not measured by survival, but by decision. In the Middle Ages, Joan of Arc, a girl with no formal military training, led a French army against a far stronger enemy. Her weapon was not strength, but conviction. And soldiers followed her, not because they had to, but because they believed. Centuries later, during the Battle of Shiroyama, Saigo Takamori and his samurai understood that the modern army had already won the war. Yet they still charged, not for victory, but for dignity. And in the Second World War, on another front, Audie Murphy stood alone against a German unit, holding a position that had already been abandoned. Not because he had a plan, but because he refused to retreat. Jack Churchill belongs to that rare company. He did not win wars by himself. He did not change the course of history. But in a world that was becoming increasingly mechanical, where outcomes were decided by factories, tanks, and production, he reminded everyone that the battlefield still had room for something much older. Personal choice. Most men are brave when they have no choice. A few are brave when they do. Those men do not stop wars, but they define the human side of them. And perhaps that is why their stories outlive the conflicts themselves. Not because they were victorious, but because when history demanded a step back, they stepped forward.